welcome everybody. It is Wednesday, May 7th, just past Cinco de Mayo, and of course, lots of things are happening. But before we get into that, we'll just do some introductions. I don't think Mike is here. I'm not sure we'll have him today, but we have my other great co-host, Glenn, and our co-host at large, Lou. So I think we've got a lot to go here. So as soon as she brings that up, we'll get rolling. All right. 134. 134 episodes of a sitcom would be considered a success. So maybe we'll go into what did they call it when they
Syndication?
yeah. We can get into syndication. They could start replaying these. Go back. I would, you know what? It would be fun to go back and review one of the ones if we still have them from the early days of the pandemic, because I think it would be instructive. Um, to see how we were going about it and like just laugh at some of the things we had to do to get everybody aboard and where it was.
They're all out there on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, I think I might go find one of those and go live some nostalgia. All right, well, welcome everyone, and my name's John Best, and with me is Glenn Servati and Lou Grilly, and today we're going to talk about. First, I want to talk about my sponsors. So we have America's Credit Unions, which I'm excited to say I've got their CEO Council coming up and several of their other events that I'm going to be going to, and we did get approved for our Big Go card. The grand prize is they will pay your way to whichever of by the time it's over, whichever of the conferences, the council conferences, not all conferences, and not travel, but your attendance or it's like $1,000 to get into those things. They'll pay for a ticket into that. So that's pretty cool, and we're excited about that as the giveaway for that. So keep playing your Big O. And they've got a lot of stuff coming up. And as I always say, if you're looking to meet up with people who are like-minded and doing the same thing that you're doing, that is the place to go, is to these council meetings, whether you're marketing, whether you're any of those things. They are very much into facilitating that collaboration. And I don't know if you saw, Glenn, I sent you some notes about the fraud statistics and how crazy they're going just this past weekend or this past week. Things are getting pretty nuts pretty fast out there from a fraud perspective, especially as people get desperate with concerns about tariffs or whatever. And to that end, you've got to have some tools to defeat that. And I can't think of a better one than Illuma, because so much of the AI fraud that we're seeing that's being perpetrated includes some sort of identity takeover or a call into the credit union to get through the MFA. They're not trying to break in with like hacking methods. They're social engineering, and they're using AI to do that. And having a biometric that can help you defeat that is really important. And Illuma is a great product. It's built for credit unions. Malen has he's just on CU Broadcast. He's got a lot more ideas. So if you haven't done something like that, it's really important that you take a look at it. I'm not sure how much longer people can survive without this technology in their credit union. I worry, because I think we're going to see some even bigger things start to play in as we see agentic AI begin to be much more prevalent out there, especially with the addition of the model context protocols that are out there now, where AI can now go out and do things sort of agentically on behalf, and it's getting easy enough that you can just literally go into ChatGPT and say, "Go do this," or any model, and give it the access to do it. It's pretty nuts. Let's move on. Hey, we just had a meeting out in Newport News at Bayport Credit Union. It was fantastic. The great Mark Wilson hosted us. Uh, Virginia American Credit Union was there. Corning, Suncoast was on the line. We had Desert Financial, which was great. True West. It was a fantastic time. A lot out of it. We really looked into a lot of things, and if you're interested in joining this group to be sort of future thinking, but at the same time have this collaborative process. We do the in-person meetings twice a year. Let us know, or take a picture, or click on the link in the chat, or there's a lot of things. I think that the collaborative process, particularly with what's going on out there, as we'll get to later, is going to be very important to survival at this point, I believe. So Hey, Glenn, you want to take this one?
Yes. Oh, we got the two new call numbers out there.
Mm.
As you know, we've been following along with the bingo card for well, since the beginning of the year, and I have to go back and refresh my memory exactly what those two entries actually correlate to. The two that I believe, maybe you can help me out, Madison. One of them is the Discover Capital One merger being approved, which was one of the things we had identified at the beginning of the year. That took about a year, and it looks like it's all full steam ahead for Capital One and Discover to combine. So that was one of the ones that came true in the course of the last since we last got together. And I believe the other one was sports stadium naming rights, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, it is.
Yep,
Number
there they
16.
are.
There we go. And this is one of those things that's become a bit of a hot button issue because it's one of the pushbacks about where are credit unions spending their money, and it winds up
So
kind of
what
tracking to a
specific one
negative
came
direction.
up?
I have
What?
to go back and look. There were multiple ones, actually. There were not the really big ones that we've seen in the past, but there were several. I would call them regional. I'll have to go back and look, but I think basically the article that came out was literally, I think it said something like more credit unions attached their name to sports facilities. I think there were like four or five that were announced all at once. The
Huh.
other one that we're not taking credit for, if you actually could go back one more time at Madison, this one, it's a real judgment call. We had the merger between Wings and Ent credit unions that was announced. It's not technically a merger of two $10 billion credit unions, but they were both sitting between 9.5 and 10 billion, which is pretty interesting. So by the letter of the law, we haven't actually hit it, but as we discussed at the Innovation Club, one of the conversations that happens a lot is if you're going to go over 10 billion and take on some of those additional regulatory constraints and other kind of issues that you might have to deal with, additional scrutiny, it's best to kind of go over it not by a little, but by a lot. And these two really kind of did about as much on that front as they possibly could because they went from being below, just barely below 10 million, right to 19 million in the blink of an eyelash. So that one is obviously still pending approval and actual execution, but that was announced over the course of the last month. And then if you go to the next page, open banking. This is another one of these interesting ones. Does it or doesn't it move forward at this point? Because that's one of the announcements that just came out that they're reconsidering that CFPB rule. For whatever reason, as they've reversed some of the other things the CFPB did at the very tail end of the Biden administration, it looked like open banking was going to kind of go through. And now all of a sudden they're saying, okay, we're going to go back and revisit that one too. So let's see where that one winds up. Were there any others on the next page? I can't remember. I guess that was it. The other one I was going to mention, which was not a bingo card square, because it would have sounded so insane if we had thrown it out there in January, as if we had put on the card. Yeah, two of the three board members of the NCUA will be summarily fired, and we'll just have one board member at NCUA with no path visible right now to actually replace them. So nobody gets credit for that on their bingo card, but it kind of just shows the world that we're living in right now.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And like I said, the winner is going to get to go to a conference. Obviously, like I said, travel's not involved. They were clear about that, but they'll pay for the ticket. Um, so Glenn was pointing this out. Since the last time we had one of these, there's been a lot. So much so that it's hard to track everything. The NCUA, um, the shifting economic indicators, just, I mean, as you're all well aware, every day something is new and changing, and a lot of it has to do with our finances as natural persons, and that seems to be, with the economy being sort of the number one issue. There's a lot of that's been happening. So we thought we would just sort of work our way through that and try to understand together what that means. So, Glenn, you want to take the first one?
Yeah, Madison, if you don't mind going to the next, and maybe one thing we can do, and you mentioned the economy, John, and the thing that I always point out is we say markets hate uncertainty. We're getting pretty uncertain right now in both the economic terms. By the way, if you didn't see, the Fed just held rates steady once again. I don't think that was a surprise to anybody. I think that was widely expected. That's what they would do. They made a point of saying it was unanimous across all the voting board members, which I thought was kind of an interesting addition. I'm watching my clock to see when they start getting blasted on X, but we'll find or Truth Social, so that should be interesting. But I didn't even bother putting on this slide because we all know we're dealing with the fact that the economy contracted in the first quarter. Whether we hit the technical definition of a recession may or may not be as relevant as how people feel about it and what kind of overall drumbeats happening around all that. The tariff 90-day hold, what's happening? I'm hearing that there are less freighters coming into the Port of Los Angeles because of that. So what that means about availability and other types of economic indicators. So we can jump into those topics as well. I think clearly we don't have time to hit on all of these, but literally just in the last, I don't know. We last did one of these almost exactly a month ago. I think it was 4 weeks ago. But these are the kind of the big ones that kind of came to my mind. The final, quote unquote, final NCUA rules, which were established late last year, are now being again revisited. They're relatively arcane, but again, when you talk about uncertainty, if there's a final rule issued and then suddenly it's no longer final, how do you know what rules you're supposed to actually be working by? Succession planning was one of the two, then probably the more interesting of the two. Dennis Dollar, I saw him speak, the former NCUA board chair, was at NCUA right when all this information kind of broke. And he commented on this. This was the day before the firing of Todd Harper and Tanya Otska was announced. And he was taking issue with the succession planning rule that was issued last year. Anyway, he believes that it gets into too much detail. And actually, although I think it's clear to me that, every organization ought to have a succession plan of some sort. His concern, and I have not dug into this enough to know the specificity, that having something too specific on file that may wind up somehow creeping into the public record could actually be a problem, because if someone knows that they're not the chosen person, it may speed their exit. So you run into some problems about just being able to run your day-to-day shop. So he actually liked the idea. He was kind of cheering for that one to kind of be revisited. The other one seemed extremely fundamental about the NCUA insurance fund and bringing it more in line with the way the FDIC worked. I don't think it was a fairly technical thing. What surprises me is that both of these rules passed 3-0 unanimously when they were voted on last year. So 2 of the directors are gone. Kyle Hauptman is still there, but he voted for both of them. He's the only director, and yet we're revisiting them. So I'm not really sure. Again, uncertainty. I do know that Kyle Hauptman, and someone pointed this out, John, at the Innovation Club, he actually did issue a statement at the time. Even though he voted for it, he actually did register some misgivings about some of this. So maybe he's just thinking he wants to kind of tweak it somewhat. But those are a couple of things I think is important to look at. Open banking, as I mentioned before, this is, again, a rule that was a final rule, and now it's being reopened by the CFPB. And then the next question that begs is who at the CFPB is going to look at it, because the organization's been pretty well kind of brought down to pure bare bones level. So one of the things that's come up a couple times is, there's no shortage of critics of the CFPB and the things they were doing, but it's one of those careful what you wish for things, as several people pointed out, both before and after the firings of the NCUA, that, there are things that need to be done that the CFPB was actually being constructed in. So if you're, throwing the good out along with the bad, that still creates some challenges. We talked already about exactly how the NCUA board's going to move forward. Also took off this page the rumors that wound up kind of making even more prominent around the idea that the NCUA could just be merged into the FDIC or the Department of Treasury. I think that might be easier said than done, but something else to be out there. I'm sure you're all aware of the tax exemptions that are at stake. One of the, actually, I wish I had the link with me, French Hill, who is the House Banking Committee chair, actually issued a press release that used the phrase how their objective is to make community banking great again. And the Jason Sturrock, who you may know, who is the chief of advocacy over at Defense Credit Union Council, actually asked for a clarification of how he defines community banking. Is that literally mean community banks, or does he include credit unions in that? Because if it's the first, that's a bit of a problem. We talked before, Capital One Discover. There was a really interesting deal, if you didn't see this, that came up, I think, also in the last week or two. Global Payments wound up buying the remaining, WorldPay. This gets kind of convoluted. WorldPay, as you may remember, was bought by FIS back in 2019. They had already sold off 55% of it to private equity. Global Payments now went ahead and bought WorldPay, both the piece that FIS still owned as well as the piece that private equity had owned. So that was half of the transaction. At the same time, FIS bought from Global Payments their issuer business, which is basically the TSYS business that Global Payments had acquired in 2019. So it's a really bizarre deal in that both of these companies basically kind of wound up asking for a do-over from the deals that they struck in 2019 and just kind of recombined their assets with TSYS, and there were other parts of TSYS that that Global Payments kept, other pieces that they'd sold off previously, and now FIS actually by taking that on has gotten rid of WorldPay, but also taken a big piece that they could have bought back directly back in 2019. So how is that going to affect the marketplace, particularly on the credit card side? And then we've got the debate around overdraft late fee. We've got the Senate that actually overrode the CFPB rule about overdraft fees. There's now also a court decision that actually pulled back the late fee regulation. Again, in isolation, looks like good news, but the lack of clarity still winds up becoming a question of when does the dust settle on all these things. So John, anything else that you would add to that list? We also mentioned, obviously, tariffs, the economy, but this is supposed to be an interactive session. So curious whether you want to just open your mics or put something in the chat. Which ones are the most interesting for us to dive into?
I think you've got the list pretty well covered. Let's see what people are thinking. So maybe Lou can kick us off with the icebreaker. I'm sure Lou has some opinions about this.
There's some pretty meaty ones up here. The tax exemption at stake is the one that really was the big topic at GAC and has been a topic at my credit union's board meetings as well. And when people are thinking how losing the exemption from federal taxes will impact credit unions, you also have to think of what about impacting the leagues? What about impacting CUSOs? Why would there be America's Credit Union if there's no more tax-exempt financial institutions to represent? Because at that point they look just like banks. So that one to me is the biggest, scariest one. And I just saw an article today that even if we escape the threat, is this something that is going to be a subject that comes up every year with this type of intensity?
And Lou and I have talked about this before. It's such a big, weighty topic that it's kind of hard to get your arms around. It's one of those that clearly we have to be mindful and be active in terms of making sure the message gets out. On the other hand, you can't allow it. I thought there was a really interesting, there's a woman named Rebecca Ryan. I think she portrayed herself as a strategic futurist. And she led a session during NCUA about strategic planning. And one of the things that she talked about was avoiding freak out corner, as she called it. I thought that was a really interesting way of putting it. She basically drew a 2x2 graph with the X and Y axis. And it was, things that are a big deal or a small deal and things that you can and can't control. And she's like, well, let's not focus too much on the things you can't control, particularly if they're not really big deals. This one is a big deal, but you still can't control it. So how much time, other than the real special people, the specialists. John's got a great question in there. How many of you have plans for being taxed? Lou, you and I had a conversation on this too, that is the end game that some or all many credit unions might say, well, why don't we just become a bank? What's the benefit of being a credit union if we're constrained in our ability to raise capital?
Exactly.
Well, we
And
heard that at our Innovation Club meeting.
Yeah,
There were
yeah.
several credit unions that discussed that very thing. It must be on the table.
yep, yep. I was just about to say we've had that. We just had our recent client conference, Valera Live, and that when I was just asking around, like what you plan to do, the larger credit unions will very likely recharter as banks, and while they lose that tax exempt status, they do gain access to equity and some other things that credit unions don't have access to today.
And I just, the piece that I still find, I mean, it depends on where the pressure for this to happen is coming from. You've obviously, it's a sore point with community banks. I have a hard time really figuring out, what benefit, what do community banks get out of that end game? They get more community banks. I mean, that might help the trade association. Does it help community banks? I'm not sure if I see how that actually is going to benefit them in the marketplace.
I'll share one thing I hear from community bank circles
Yeah,
is that
please.
as you might expect, it drives them bananas to see when a credit union acquires a bank, and what people maybe not on the individual bank level will say is that you've gone from a tax generating financial engine for the community to a non-tax entity. Now, I know that there's strong, governmental efforts trying to, work on that issue. But they'll also say things like, well, who's going to take care of the small businesses because credit unions can't quite, keep up with the demand of the communities, that sort of thing. They're also very big into local decision-making authorities. So having
they at this point being community banks or credit unions?
Correct, community banks.
Community banks, okay.
Yeah. So I don't want to go too deep down that path, but that's some of the things you would hear is you're taking away a taxable entity. You're also underserving the business needs in the community.
So, Scott, I was having this conversation with senior executives of a credit union, and the point he made was their comptroller, CFO, was, "Hey, you know what? There's so many things that I could get tax relief on that I could make changes to that we don't because because they do pay taxes on some things,
Sure.
that they felt like they could just do what banks do and everyone else does and just sort of make it a non-issue. Um, but I'm not sure everybody has that expertise or whether or not that's even. I mean, it seemed like it was a viable strategy from what he said. But yeah, with that in mind, I mean, can you just stay a credit union entity and say, I mean, what's the difference from converting to a bank, like you said, and being taxed or staying as a credit union and being taxed? I think the difference is that the juxtaposition of the mission of the organization gets to stay the same as a credit union.
I actually, I don't know, this probably hadn't happened very often, but last week or the week before, I met someone at a mutual bank that said that they used to be a credit union. And if I provide more information, maybe people can figure out who I'm talking about. But they said we did it in part so we could provide more services to the community as opposed to less. I'm sure there was more to it than that.
I just saw an article recently, and then they were pointing out that mutual banks are, even like closer to extinction. Like, given all the different types of institutions that are vanishing,
they're mostly in the Northeast, aren't they?
And even then, I mean, I think the sheer number, I have to go back into I don't know where I saw that. I'm trying to recall where I saw that article, but there was a comment along those lines.
I think where we're at is in part, if you're an independently owned, family owned community bank that's been around for 90 years and there's no clear, succession or other family members to run the bank. If a credit union can pay more than another community bank, you're going to find a lot of bankers going with I'm going to sell more to the credit union, and that's business at that point.
I saw Dave made a couple of comments. I think, I think you're making great points. There are still clear distinctions, and that's one of the reasons I think, again, the idea the credit unions go away is easier said than done. Scott, I really like that you brought that
Wait,
up.
how do the mutual banks explode? I thought they would implode, but
I think what he's saying is more credit unions will convert to mutual banks. Right? Is that what you're saying, Dave?
you're welcome to unmute, Dave.
Sorry, I'm having problems getting my Zoom to work. I just think, mutual banks are dying, but you see all these things, taxation comes, I think mutual banks explode and becomes the new credit union platform. Like, why accept these limitations if they're just going to tax us with no consideration? I mean, credit unions suck at credit cards because our interest rates and fee structures are completely different, right? So why would I charge 18% for an F borrower when a bank charges 25? Not that we're out to screw a consumer or a member, but I think there's so many considerations that credit unions accept as a result of the taxation. If those all go away and all they say is like, we're going to tax you with no consideration of all those things, I just don't understand why anybody would stay at credit union. I think all these resources shift to a different model. I don't think, but I also heard somebody talk at a Callahan roundtable, like if you have 100 basis points of ROA and you go to 80 basis points of ROA, is that a death to the credit union? I mean, I think that it's somewhat exaggerated. Yeah. Is it a cost that everybody wants to bear? No. But will there be more focus on profit in the credit union world? Absolutely.
No, I don't disagree with that. I think that it's but the thing is, I think if you have that kind of ROA, and that's not been the case for, we're not doing a lot of returns on anything these days. Like your savings account, I mean, nobody is. So, I mean, to some extent, there's a point there that the whole idea of the co-op is to share in the returns, but we're not necessarily living that. But my question is, how are we not just sort of like reverting back to S&Ls if everybody becomes a mutual bank? And by SNL, I don't mean Saturday Night Live. I mean the old
Talk about a model that vanished.
But was it? I mean, and remind me, what killed savings and loans was, what was it? I want to go back and look.
It was the mortgage crisis and the time of high interest rates where they were just totally upside down as far as fixed rate mortgages and high cost of borrowing. But then they also got a terrible reputation for some sketchy behavior. So I think it was a kind of a double whammy right around that time in the 1980s.
The mortgages, I think that was, because it was funny because the system we were on when I first got into credit unions, I was always told it was Miser. That was a traditional SNL system. There are a lot, a lot of credit unions are still on that system, but yeah, it says interest rate mismatches was a big part of it. Regulation Q, which limited the interest banks could pay on deposits.
And that's what it comes down to right off the bat is they wound up.
And then, I mean, but this makes Dave's point though. One of the other things it says is poor risk management and speculation. And if you're going to,
that's where they got the bad reputation, and they were caught in such a box that I think they were almost kind of, the temptation became too great to speculate because that was the one way out of their box.
Was the Keating 5 SNL?
Exactly. That's the kind of stuff
there
I'm
you
thinking
go.
of. So all of a sudden, being a member or a customer,
you mean Michael Keating and his family from Family Ties or Family Life? I can't remember what it was. What's the Keating 5? I don't know what that is.
Charles Keating, wasn't he the one down in?
Yeah, I think it was an I think it was an SNL. The Keating 5 had something to do with maybe senators blocking or keeping SNL executives from having to answer to Congress on something. And basically, they were doing some shady stuff.
Madison or Melissa, if you could Wikipedia this, I think it was Charles Keating, if I'm not mistaken.
That sounds right.
Yeah. Dave, something else you said just occurred to me. We talk a lot about credit unions buying banks. I don't know the answer to this, but there's so many credit unions who have sold off their credit card portfolios to Elan. Is that kind of a loophole that
You mean Musk, right? They sold it to Elon Musk.
Oh yeah, right. That's Elan with an A, not an O.
Okay.
But is that an end around? If once a credit union sells its portfolio to Elan, are they still subject to that interest rate cap, or can they then go higher?
I don't know for sure. We keep ours in house, but my understanding is yes, it is a loophole.
Yeah, so that's almost the flip side of what's happening with banks. And as I said, John, at the Innovation Club, my credit union that I've been a member of for now 40 years, 39 years, sold off the portfolio to Elan, I think about 2 years ago. And it's without question the single worst customer experience I've ever had at that credit union. So I have a pretty strong opinion on that one. It doesn't have anything to do with the interest rate either. I have to look and see if they've raised the interest rate. I haven't really paid attention because I don't carry a balance.
It's interesting you say that because it appears it was a trend because, we've been doing a lot of mergers. We're involved with a lot of those, and we've been building out a lot of new tools and processes for that. And consistently, we are finding the credit unions that are being merged, more often than not, seem to have their credit card portfolios elsewhere. And
yeah, I don't
so
know that Elan gets to that level of detail because they're buried within Elavon and US Bank, et cetera. It's probably too small a piece of the business. I'd love to know. It just feels to me that they've been acquiring those portfolios left and right.
I mean, it's a horrible product to manage, in my opinion. We use CPS, Jack Henry. I mean, making changes, interest rate changes, bucket changes, credit card act. I mean, it is a very hard product to manage. So I understand why some credit unions sell it off. You want to have it as a core product, but also managing it is extremely challenging, I think.
Yeah. And the problem that I have, like I say, is it still has my credit union's name on it, and it's giving them a bad name. I happen to know enough that I don't hold it too other than the decision to sell it off. I don't hold it that much against them.
So Dave, the groups that are working through this, I mean, it seems to me like right now would be the time to start building capital reserves based on your comment.
I would sure think so. I mean, we had 1.4 ROA last year. We've been managing rates hard through the interest rate cycle. But again, it's that balance of, do you feel greedy? Like, are you giving enough back to members, or, are you building capital? We're trying to build capital.
It's funny because I had Darren Williams from Westcom once said something I thought was pretty profound. He said, if we were organized like a bank and people got stock and there was, what would our stock be? What would be our dividends? And he's, in his mind, that was products and services, right? So more ATMs that are closer, making sure that, you can do digital issuance on a credit card. These convenient services are the dividends that you pay back. And if we were to look at some of these models, we've talked about I believe the still I believe that we still are still looking at well capitalized at 7%, right? That's our benchmark that we've had for a long time. And there are a lot of people that will say, well, anything above that is, like you said, Dave, it's taking from the members. But I think at this point, it wouldn't be if you're trying to survive a possible taxation. I don't think it's being greedy at this point. I think it's a necessary defense strategy to stay intact and continue to provide services. I think you could look at that a different way. That's okay, well, there's this new environmental thing and we've got to save up some money to have, to prevent that if this does happen, we're still prepared and we're solid. And if we need to fight it, we need legal defenses to do that or whatever. And that's where I think the collaboratory, of this very thing is a big important piece of it. So I decided to ask, I've been playing around with a couple different models and I've been building a rubric in AI that what it does. So for those of you that don't know, a rubric is like a test scheme for AI. The best one is the strawberry one. Everybody's heard that, right? You ask an AI model to tell you how many R's there are in strawberry. and inevitably it gets it wrong. It just can't do it. And it insists it's right. It's pretty hilarious. It'll say there are, 2 R's, and you'll go, nope. And it'll keep pushing it through. So I wanted to build a little rubric of questions I would ask to see how up to date these models are on regulatory and things like that. So I've been building that out. And as I've done it, what I found is that the Claude 3.7 Sonnet seems to be really well trained in the financial services and the regulatory models, and not only that, but cross-referencing into things like Sarbanes-Oxley and whatnot. And so I asked it, because I figured it was the smartest one. Hey, what do you do if how do you prepare for taxation? And here's what it gave. It said build capital reserves, a la Dave. So Dave is as smart as Claude. Conduct financial impact analysis. Have you done that, Dave?
Yeah, we've looked at like what the impact would be. Again, I mean, I think people are being dramatic when they say it's the death of credit unions. I mean, I think there's a financial way to get through this. I mean,
I do too. I think you just have to, but I think if you don't acknowledge it as a potential reality and start preparing for it, it could be a problem.
I'm also hearing kind of a 2 birds with 1 stone thing, because if you're accumulating capital, that's probably a pretty good idea in an uncertain time where, we may be looking at a downturn in more loan delinquencies too. May not be the worst thing to have some extra capital on hand for either of those 2 reasons.
Well, and it says to evaluate fee structures and interest rates. That's a tough one, because I don't think we can fee our way out of this. I do think non-interest income could be very valuable. And I was talking the other day, I mentioned this to the credit union space. Something I believe very strongly is that we need, there are going to be some good subscription services. We have to figure out how to stop giving digital away as table stakes for what we do. And could there be some subscription services that would provide revenue so that you could continue to grow, and I don't even want to call it digital anymore. It's just doing business. It's the world now. But these, the technology aspects and the services and features that need to be provided. And this idea of some sort of subscription thing is coming together. I know Connecta is trying something like that. Willis was telling me about it. I'm just not sure what it looks like. My idea was, for here in Florida, I'm trying to convince Suncoast to create a preppers subscription, like an account where you show up at the credit union and there's a box of money for the hurricane. There's a bunch of food in a bucket, one of those food buckets. Like, remember Y2K, they were selling the food buckets for when everything ended. We'll have one of those. And you also get, I don't know, a couple inner tubes and a canoe. I don't know, something like that. But I mean, there could be things like that could be very valuable for people who might be interested in services like that. I think one thing that's not mentioned in here is being innovative. Like, there might be a great way to innovate your way out of this, to diversify these revenue streams, and what that is, I don't know yet, but a lot of smart people, I think, working on it. So
Scott made the point before he dropped, and I'm going to follow. I really appreciate him bringing up, because it's kind of ridiculous to have this one-sided debate without somebody raising the issues on the other side of the table. I do push back on some of those, though, because for one, he raised it pretty clearly, and I've heard this before. It's a drop in the bucket how much money we're talking about. If you're doing 2 things: one, if you're arguing from a community bank, just pure "this is unfair" standpoint, then that's a different conversation. What's really seeming to drive it this time around is this, desire to leave no stone unturned to cut the federal budget so it can be redeployed, or we can do other things to cut nobody seems to be talking about cutting the deficit, which is one of the more disturbing things about it. We're just looking to, reduce taxes or shift the money into other buckets. But regardless of that, there's not that much money there, and it's probably overstated already, because there's been no reason to minimize your tax burden. So it's probably a very overstated amount that would actually be raised, because people haven't put any tax planning strategy into it. So, I mean, a couple of things there. The other one that really gets me, and this is, again, I want to give a lot of credit to the Defense Credit Union Council, Jason Sturrock over there, because he raised this point, is roughly 50% of banks, particularly community banks, and as Scott said, family banks, small numbers, small confined ownership groups. Many of those banks, we talked about this. Somebody was it you, Jim? Somebody on the call even mentioned in Wyoming that it was over half are subchapter S corporations. Guess what? They're not taxed, and it flows through to their owners, and then they pay tax on a personal basis. Isn't that basically what credit unions are doing? Except instead of doing it with a very, very small number of shareholders, they're doing it with all the shareholders. To your point, John, whether they're doing it in terms of lower rates, some other kind of interest, or potentially a patronage refund. So I think there's, it's I mean, like I say, one of the problems as we started the conversation that we can drive ourselves, we wrap ourselves around the axle talking about it. But I think, Dave, you make a great point. Scenario planning and just figuring out, the what ifs are, a kind of a natural approach, and capital seems to be kind of pretty central to all of those.
I mean, I think one way that's been happening too is a lot of the mergers. And I know people are out there actively looking for those, but I also worry that, merging that in, or the merger process, that's why I've been working so hard on this. We got to find a way, because the biggest thing you lose is a whole bunch of revenue in I believe in the interchange, because you have to reissue all the time, and then people get it out. Those subscription processes, especially the card on file, are a pretty good chunk of revenue, for recurring revenue for that. I wish that Lou would come up with a way to automatically move all the subscriptions over to Netflix. And I tried to do that. I actually built something that was a long time ago, but I think that if you don't have some sort of subscription service, that might be worth investing in for people. It's also the kind of thing you could package up and sell, because it's a competitor to Rocket Money, which I think is becoming very, very popular from what I'm seeing, just doing the research out there and
Yep.
people using it. What's funny about it is it's terrible at what it's designed. It's good at finding recurring transactions and subscriptions, but it's terrible at finding, it says it can shut them down, but like everything I want to shut down, it goes, yeah, here's the phone number. I'm like, well,
I noticed that they
not-
really try their best to take credit for that, but not commit that they can.
But I have an idea for a poor man's subscription model. And here it is. And you guys can all take it if you want. Create some sort of separate checking account, or a virtual number, but I'd go separate checking account, and tell them to get courtesy pay for free in it, or something. Like, you won't charge them if they put their subscriptions into that checking account. If for some reason you can't pay the $9.99 or however much it is for Netflix, it'll cover it without charging you any kind of overdraft. And you would actually have a good subscription, because the problem is finding the subscriptions, which is what Rocket Money does. But if we were to just separate them out, which a lot of people do anyways, they put them all into one credit card or something. But if we were to sort of acknowledge that, give rewards points, or do something for them bringing those subscriptions over, I think that could be really valuable and bring a lot of money. It might be something people, would latch onto as a service, if it, and you could give the value without having to break the bank, because how often, nobody wants their service to stop.
Well, I'm thinking of it on both sides. I like that idea a lot. It's, nobody wants their service to stop. It's a recurring revenue stream, because these things are recurring charges. But I'm still, the negative, the glass half empty guy in this one. When you can't get the thing turned off, if you can provide, whether it's, hey, we're just changing the number, so it's just going to stop because there's no money to hit anymore. That's
I mean, and it's things we all have control of that we don't. It's one of those things that you could package up as a product just with marketing and not have to go out and buy anything. Your home banking should be there. You could give it a name. You could, it's like what we used to do with free checking. Everything had to become free checking. So let's create subscription processing or subscription checking or something. I don't know. But
if you're doing it that way, why not do it as an ACH? It'd be cost free.
Because you don't get any interchange.
True. Good point.
Spend money on, and that's what they're trying to do now. We should talk about that with pay to bank or
Pay by bank, yeah,
Pay
that's
by bank. Yeah. That's a concern as well because that just rolled out, and I could see a lot of these retailers and vendors trying to switch over to that the moment they can because it solves, the money they're paying towards Visa, the interchange they pay towards us. Like that's a concern as well, but that's a whole different thing.
I think I told you my conspiracy theory on that one. That's great for the really big guys.
Do you
like
think Elon's behind it?
the Walmart, Pfizer. I mean, the partnership they've got going. I think obviously Walmart stands to save a lot of money if they take that approach. But for any smaller, I don't even want to say mom and pop, but anybody who's got an ISO and a middleman there, you go to all these places, then they are at this point are paying a blended rate for debit and credit. So, when they talk about surcharging, on one level, anybody who knows about credit card and debit card fees knows that if you pull out a debit card, you shouldn't be paying the same surcharge. But these merchants are like, well, they charge me the same for the two of them, so I'm treating them the same. I think pay by bank's going to wind up looking very much like that. I bet you that an ISO is going to get in the middle and they're just going to roll that into another weighted average fee.
So they can get their nickel out of it. You're probably right.
And then you'll wind up surcharging on that too.
I mean, isn't that what RPPS did?
In a way, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a MasterCard RPPS during the sort of the bill pay rails build out.
I realized a corollary to what we were talking about in terms of taxation. I don't know if anybody saw this, another bullet point we could have put on the chart. State of Washington, if you didn't see past legislation, talk about very specific. For any credit union that buys a bank, they lose the tax exemption, which, I mean, that's going to affect, it'll probably stop one or two. I'd have to go back and look.
What if you just buy a branch?
That's an interesting question. That's actually, I have to see how that wording of that.
Because I see that more often than are they talking because I also see the commercial services often spun out of the institution when the credit union buys them.
Which argues against what Scott said. If they're spinning out the commercials, where are they spinning it out to, I guess?
They get sold out to other commercial, big commercial service providers, from what I can tell.
So they're not, unless the small business gets lost in the mix. That's I guess the challenge.
Yeah, if someone decides to implement, I'm looking at you, Jim Yates, my subscription idea, let me know. I'll help. I just think that's an easy one. I just think if you can wrap up, and I've said this forever, and Jim actually worked with me initially trying to get my first product out that I tried to build, but is if you can find a way to become, it's like direct deposit. If you can be the institution of choice for these recurring subscription payments, I think you got it good. I think that that's a important concept these days because, and it's it's so irritating because everything has in-app purchases and all these different things that are happening. And then if you could get that going, you could even stage it. Once you get that, then maybe it wouldn't be hard to add something to that to say, well, now we got it all in one place. Let's figure out a way to provide some value with some reporting in the statements or some other things. It wouldn't be that hard to put together it'd be like Rocket Money, where, the benefit would be you're not paying anything for it, but the credit makes because maybe there's a limit. Maybe you got to move at least 3 over or something to get the deal, or 5 or something. I see Jim shaking his head. He's with me, man. He's with me. I'd drive to Wyoming right now. We'll get going. Anyway, so anybody else want to jump in on any of these other things? I posted the little executive summary. I do highly recommend you talk to one of the AIs about this. But when you do it, let me encourage you to tell it to go out and look at the news now. Well, most of these AIs have the ability to search the web now. And before you have it respond, say, hey, can you go out and look at the latest on the news with regard to taxation on credit unions? And then let it formulate its response. Because America's Credit Unions put out an incredible document on that there's a great summary on with, how they actually said that it will hurt the economy. It'll have a big economic impact on it, and it'll have it would reduce the GDP. I mean, they put in lost income tax revenue and all kinds of things. And so I'll put that report out there real fast. for everybody to take a look at. But I thought this was pretty interesting. So, you know, I got to look at the numbers to back it up, but I just think that I remember this last time it happened, and I was so young to the credit union thing. I didn't know what was going on. Everybody's wearing buttons and everything says, I didn't even know what an HR, I thought HR was coming after me for something called 1153 or 1 or something. I thought, boy, I better be careful because HR is everywhere around this place. They are looking for you. All right. Well, does anybody else want to chime in on anything? Otherwise, I might call it a little early because I think this has been a really good discussion. I appreciate Dave Krause and Lou and everyone else getting involved. And if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to me or Glenn directly. Or I know Lou loves to answer questions, and we all do. We want to help. We want this industry to survive. And I wanted to just share a little information before I go. I thought this was really cool. So when we went to Bayport Credit Union for the Innovation Club, I got there and the CEO wanted to see me. That always worries me just a hair in my life. It's always been like, hey, the CEO, because but I went in and he wanted to tell me how much he enjoyed our podcast that Glenn and I do together at the Big Cast, which Lou's been on many times. And it always surprises me how many people are out there listening to that. And Glenn I wanted to publicly thank Glenn for driving this up all these years because as you know, I have tremendous ADHD. So I'm with him, I'm out, I'm in, I'm out. But Glenn has made this a huge success. So for those of you that haven't listened, go check it out. Maybe we can put a link in there. But people are paying attention, and I appreciate that. And we just want more input. We want to work with you. We want to help. And he thanked me anyways. I'm sure he thanked Glenn too for what Big is trying to do with these things to help folks out, and Glenn too. So
I was shocked. I went in I talked to him briefly the day after you did. And I made a reference to the podcast that had literally posted like 15 hours earlier.
Honey, I Shrunk the
I already heard that,
NCUA.
and he quoted it.
Was it the Honey, I Shrunk the NCUA?
No, well, that was the blog. No, this was the one with Medicare and
Medicare,
Silver.
Yep.
And this week's got some interesting stuff. And if anybody's interested, Lou, I don't know if you were in any of these sessions. I know you were at Not Your Payments as well. Again, it's an electronic payments conference. I mean, it's ACH, but they really cover things more broadly, real-time payments and whatnot. But there seemed to be more animosity pointed toward paper checks than I've heard in some time, in several sessions. I spoke to the head of the Payments Association of South Africa. That's in this week's Big Cast. South Africa, in a very, very short period of time, eliminated paper checks from their system. And I thought that was a really fascinating case study. There are enough reasons to say, okay, it can't happen here, just based on what they came in with and just the size of the economy and whatnot, and their lower reliance on checks in the first place. But it does show kind of a pathway where something like that potentially could happen. And I found that was fascinating.
I also want to give a lot of the credit to the staff, to Madison and Jackie and the producers of it. And the marketing. So just really proud of it. And I couldn't have been prouder the CEO, who I've met a few times, but just it was really nice to hear that. So I hope more of you are getting that. I just want to make sure others know about it and get that. We don't talk about it a lot, and it just sort of is out there along with this. And we probably could do a better job of connecting those dots. So if you're not on our mailing list, beyond the town hall for some of this stuff, let us know. But I do think that now is the time that we have to build more collaborative networks as this moves along, because we're going to need each other to survive. And we want to help with ideas or just even bouncing it off people. So, all right, well, I'm going to call it. If you've got anything, you good, Glenn?
I'm good.
Jim Yates, he's got his hand over his mouth. I think he's afraid. As long as he's not doing this, the Home Alone thing, then you're in trouble. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. And I hope everybody has a good day until next time. And hopefully we'll have more. Check out my Deep Seek podcast if you haven't heard it.
Oh, that's a great one. In fact, there's a part 2 of that too. I don't know if you have time to put that in, Madison and Melissa. There's a full podcast about the risks of DeepSeek and some of the general kind of security issues with AI. I think you talked to this woman, Emma Zabayos, for close to an hour. So we managed to trim it down to something more like 30, 40 minutes, but it was really hard because there was so much good stuff. So there's a second podcast that actually has a kind of bonus content that in my mind is every bit as good.
All right, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you. See ya.
Take care.